That morning, Hale lay, half awake, watching Julian sleep beside him. His features were relaxed in rest, completely different from the cold, sharp edges he showed the world. Hale's eyes trailed over him, his strong jaw, the messy strands of brown curly hair over his forehead. Mine, Hale thought possessively. He's mine now. A smirk tugged at his lips as he reached out and brushed a finger along Julian's bare shoulder. He was already imagining a life clinging to Julian's side, lavish, stable, untouchable. No more begging for crumbs of attention. I'll make sure he only looks at me. Then, a knock at the front door. Hale frowned, sighing dramatically as he slid out of bed. He padded to the door barefoot, pulling it open with a lazy, annoyed expression. Only for it to immediately drop into shock. Emory. Hale blinked. What the hell are you doing here? Equally stunned, Emory stared at his brother, eyes widening as he took in the disheveled robe, tousled hair, and very obvious setting behind him. You spent the night here. Emory's voice was sharp. Hale, you didn't come home last night. I needed space, besides, you're not my babysitter. I'm an adult and can do whatever I please, Hale snapped, crossing his arms. But his eyes narrowed, filled with something darker. What I really want to know is why you're here, Emory. Just then, Julian appeared in the living room, still dressed in sleep pants and a shirt he'd just pulled on. Everything okay? He asked, clearly thrown off by the tension. Emory turned to him, quickly brushing off the confrontation. Sorry. I didn't mean to intrude. I just came to talk about the housing project. Julian nodded. Right. The community outreach. Hale's jaw clenched tighter. What project? Emory looked between them. You didn't tell him? Julian rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. I didn't think he'd be interested. You're not exactly the volunteer type. Well, maybe I am now, Hale cut in sharply, stepping forward. Maybe I want to be part of it. Julian and Emory both turned to him in disbelief. You want to help with a low-income housing project? Julian asked, eyebrows raised. You hate being around poor people, Emory added dryly. Hale's smile was too sweet, too tight. Well, I can't be shallow forever, can I? Maybe it's time I evolved. Julian gave him a side glance, suspicious, but said nothing. Emory looked skeptical. Are you sure, Hale? Hale's eyes flicked to Julian, and then back to his brother. I want to help. I'm serious. He forced on a softer smile. For once, maybe I'll actually do something different for a change. There was a beat of silence. Julian finally sighed. All right. If you're in, you're in. Emory slowly nodded, though doubt still clouded his face. But Hale didn't care. After the awkward conversation, the air in Julian's small living room was still thick with unspoken tension. Julian became the peacekeeper. He cleared his throat and said with a light smile, all right. How about I make us breakfast? Really? Hale stretched with a yawn and flopped onto the couch, glancing at Emory like he was on top of the world. You're spoiling me now. Emory rolled his eyes but said nothing. Julian noticed the look and chuckled to himself as he disappeared into the tiny kitchen. A few minutes later, Hale peeked into the bedroom, frowning. Julian, I can't go out dressed like this. Do you have something I can wear? Julian tossed him a set of clean clothes. Here. They might be a bit loose. Hale caught the clothes and smirked. Loose or not, you're a lifesaver. Then, without skipping a beat, he turned to Emory who was seated at the table and added with mock sweetness, See, Em. He takes such care of me. Emory didn't look up from the mug he was sipping. I don't know how that's supposed to concern me. Ouch, Hale grinned, unbothered. Still bitter, I see. Still childish, Emory muttered under his breath. The sun had climbed higher by the time they all piled into Julian's small fishing boat. The sea breeze was brisk, tugging at their hair as Julian expertly started the motor. "Hold on," he called over the engine's hum. Hale immediately slid close to Julian, his arm brushing against his, making sure Emory saw. He even kissed him several times on the lips and smirked at Emory each time. Emory blinked at him, disbelief flashing in his eyes before he turned his head to stare at the water, jaw tight. Julian glanced between them, confused. "You alright, Emory?" "Peachy," Emory muttered. Julian gave Hale a look but didn't comment. Something was definitely off. Moments later. They docked at the small pier, Julian hopping out first to tie the boat, followed by Emory and then Hale, who took his sweet time stretching dramatically before stepping off. A small crowd had already begun to gather around the open area of the town center. Among them were Nicky and his father, Matthew, both chatting with some of the townspeople. Nicky's gaze swept over the new arrivals, and halted when he saw Hale. He blinked, then looked at Emory sharply, stepping toward him. "What is he doing here?" he whispered. Emory sighed. "I don't know. He invited himself." Nicky's eyes narrowed. "That's rich." Hale, noticing the two talking in low voices, narrowed his eyes and raised his voice, well. Aren't you two looking cozy?" Emory turned to glare at him. "Seriously?" Before he could reply, Matthew stepped forward, smiling warmly. "Hale. It's been a while." But instead of responding graciously, Hale shrank back slightly, like he'd just been handed something rotten. "Oh, yeah." Emory elbowed him lightly. "That's Matthew. Remember? He was close with Richard St. Clair. He's Nicky's father." "I know who he is," Hale snapped defensively, avoiding Matthew's eyes. Matthew's smile faltered just a little, but he said nothing. Nicky rolled his eyes and walked away towards Julian, clearly uninterested in Hale's theatrics. Julian waved at Nicky as he approached. "Is everything okay?" "Yes," Nicky replied, eyeing Hale briefly before focusing on Julian. Meanwhile, Hale watched Nicky walk off with a sneer curling at his lips. He remembered clearly now, how as children, he'd mocked Nicky for his worn shoes, his second-hand clothes, the hand-me-downs that never quite fit. He'd made him feel small. And now, Nicky was well-liked. Respected. And worst of all, he was close to Julian. Hale's eyes drifted to Emory and narrowed. No matter what, he told himself, they're not getting between me and what I want. Soon, the meeting began. A makeshift platform was set up, nothing more than a few stacked crates and a large canvas spread behind it. Emory stood on it, humble and composed, addressing the gathered crowd of fishermen, vendors, homemakers, and curious townsfolk who had trickled in to see what the fuss was about. Hale stood off to the side, arms folded, trying not to yawn. The sun was warm on his face, the salt in the air clung to his skin, and the sound of the waves nearby was more interesting than the heartfelt speech his brother was giving. He watched as Emory spoke passionately. "I know what you're thinking," Emory said, voice steady. "That this is too ambitious. That someone like me, someone with the Montgomery name, might just disappear halfway. But I'm not here to make promises I can't keep. I'm here to finish what Richard St. Clair started, and I will, no matter what." There were murmurs in the crowd. Someone raised a hand. "But what about your father? Isn't he part of why Richard's dream got buried in the first place?" "Yeah," another person chimed in. "Isn't this just a pipe dream? You need serious money for something like this." Emory took a deep breath. "My father won't be an obstacle," he replied carefully. "He and I don't see eye to eye on this. But I'm not doing this for him. I'm doing this for you. And as for funding..." He didn't even get the chance to finish before Julian stepped forward, his voice calm and clear. "Julian Halstead has agreed to fund this project," he said, addressing the crowd directly. "He believes in it. Just like Richard did." And he's not the only one, we're speaking with others who want to help rebuild Brighton from the inside out. Heads turned. Eyes widened. The mood changed. The murmurs turned into soft smiles, hopeful nods. Emory added, also, I'm a doctor. I plan to provide free checkups and basic medical care to everyone who supports the cause. You don't have to go far to get help anymore. That did it. A small cheer went up. Smiles spread. People clapped. One woman at the front wiped her eyes with a handkerchief. God bless you, Emory, someone called out. You're not like your father. Another said, shaking his hand. More came forward after the meeting ended, eager to thank him, patting his shoulder, sharing their stories, and even offering to volunteer. Emory handled it with quiet grace, nodding, listening, smiling genuinely. And off to the side, Hale simmered. He watched it all, watched how they praised his brother like he was some golden angel sent to save them. He scoffed under his breath. How noble, he muttered sarcastically. Julian, standing next to him, smiled faintly as he looked at Emory. He's something else. Hale's eyes flicked to Julian sharply. He didn't like the softness in his voice. The warmth in his gaze. Hale forced a laugh. Well, aren't you just in awe of Saint Emory? Should we canonize him now or wait till after lunch? Julian didn't even look at him. He just kept watching Emory as he helped an elderly woman back to her seat. I am serious, Julian said quietly. People like him are rare. That hit a nerve. Hale's smirk faltered. His fingers curled slightly against his sides. The same Emory who used to fall asleep with his glasses on. The same Emory who didn't know how to say no to a single person. He was just some bleeding heart. And yet, Julian looked at him like he was everything. And Hale didn't like that at all. Not one bit. Soon, everyone started to disperse. Up ahead, Emory and Nikki were walking side by side, chatting and laughing, their heads tilted toward one another like old friends. A few paces behind, Julian and Hale followed. Matthew lingered in the back, greeting a few more familiar faces. Hale tried to keep his tone casual, though he couldn't help the edge in his voice. So, he said, brushing imaginary dust off his shirt, there's a classical concert tonight at the Portside Hall. Private seating. I could get us in. Julian didn't respond immediately. His eyes were trained ahead, narrowed ever so slightly as he watched Emory and Nikki practically glowing with ease and connection. Hale noticed the shift and frowned. I'm talking to you, he said, sharper now. Or are you too busy wondering what they're giggling about? Julian blinked, pulled from his thoughts, and glanced at Hale. Sorry, he said, they seem to be getting along well. That's all. Hale scoffed, face tightening. You're staring at him like you've never seen him before. What, is this your new thing? Compassion for the town's golden boy? Before Julian could answer, a sudden loud honk blared behind them. A sleek convertible rolled to a stop beside them. Inside sat Owen and Marcus, two of Hale's flamboyant, wildly dressed friends, mischief practically dripping from their expressions. Hale. Owen leaned over the door. Where the hell did you disappear to? The party was dull after you left. Marcus chimed in, flipping his perfectly styled hair. We even stopped by your place. You missed it. Thorn Mateo, yes, the Thorn, wants a private sit-down with you. Today, darling. Today. And guess who wasn't home? Hale's eyes widened for a split second. The Thorn Mateo. One-on-one. A real shot. He looked at Julian. His jaw clenched, fingers twitching at his side. Julian looked concerned now. Where are you going and who is Thorn Mateo? He's a big-time movie director, Hale said quickly, shaking his head. He forced a charming smile. I should go, I mean, it's Thorn Mateo. I can't miss this. Julian nodded slowly, but his eyes didn't hide the disappointment. Right, of course. Good luck. I'll see you later, alright? Hale said, stepping back toward the car. Don't miss me too much. He climbed in with Owen and Marcus, the door slamming behind him. The engine revved, and with a playful honk and a wave from Marcus, the car sped off. Julian stood there for a moment, watching them go. Then turned and continued walking quietly behind Emory and Nikki. Suddenly Matthew called out from behind. Come along, son. Let's head home. I need your help with something, he said, tone casual. Nikki immediately ran back to his father. He glanced toward Julian and Emory, who were now walking side by side, the air between them heavy and oddly quiet. He arched a brow. What do you need help with? The bakery's already closed. Matthew leaned in slightly, keeping his voice low. Read the air, boy. Nikki blinked, confused at first, until his father subtly motioned toward the pair walking ahead. Matthew said quietly. There's something delicate forming there. You mean Julian and Emory? Nikki asked, skeptical. Matthew didn't answer right away. He just looked ahead, his weathered face thoughtful. I saw it all today. The way they look at each other when they think no one's watching. That kind of quiet, it usually means something. And maybe, just maybe, it'll be enough to pull Julian out of that darkness he's been buried in for so long. Nikki sighed, stuffing his hands into his pockets. I get what you're saying. But I don't know, Pa. I've never seen anyone angrier at the world than Julian. He's so wrapped in getting back at the ones who wronged him, he doesn't think of anything else. Matthew gave his son a quiet, knowing look. Then let's hope someone like Emory has the hands to patch him up. The walk between Julian and Emory stretched long and quiet. The only sound was the distant waves and the crunch of their shoes on the gravel. Emory walked with his arms folded, occasionally glancing at Julian, unsure how to break the silence. Julian, after a few seconds of biting his tongue, finally spoke. Let's hurry to the boat so you can get home faster. Emory blinked in surprise. Oh. Sure. They picked up the pace slightly, and soon reached the tiny wooden pier where Julian's modest boat rocked gently in the evening tide. Julian jumped aboard easily and offered a hand to help Emory in. But as Emory stepped onto the slick wooden edge, his foot slipped. Whoa. Emory. Julian reached forward instinctively, trying to catch him. Only to lose his balance too. Splash. Both went under, the water pulling them in with a cold shock. Seconds later, they surfaced, sputtering and soaked, bobbing beside the boat in the golden light of dusk. Julian gasped out a breath and then burst into unexpected laughter, his wet hair plastered across his forehead. Emory blinked, lips trembling between shivering and a smile. Well, that wasn't how I thought today would end. Julian looked at him. The soft light kissed Emory's face, droplets clinging to his lashes, his usually neat hair tousled by the fall. There was something completely unguarded about him in that moment, something gentle and true. Julian's laughter faded. For a brief second, he forgot everything else. All he saw was Emory. The space between them shifted, charged. Julian's hand reached out, brushing against Emory's arm beneath the surface. Emory's breath hitched. Julian leaned in, close enough that Emory could feel the heat of his breath even in the cool water. Their eyes locked and the world quieted. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe to the channel for more episodes.